I bring greetings to you from the Ganga team, and I hope that you and all your family members are good and safe in these challenging times. The Indian Orthopedic Association, along with Janssen, has taken this excellent step of continuing the education, and we at Ganga are really happy and proud and feel privileged to be a part of this. So I would also like to start off for Ortho TV to join in this initiative so that the reach would really be great. We have Dr. Venkat Das, who is the consultant and head of the pediatric orthopedic department in Ganga Hospital, Coimbatore. He has a passion for pediatric orthopedics and had his training inland with Dr. Ashok Johari and Virsha Madhuri, and then did his postdoctoral fellowship in limb reconstruction in the MGR Medical University, Chennai, and then had an advanced fellowship in pediatric and adolescent hip disorders in San Diego in USA. He's a very active member of POSI and has a keen interest on research, academics, and publication, and has authored several international publications, and also was the organizing secretary for POSICON 2020.
Thank you, sir. Good evening to all of you. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm going to be the opening batsman for today's webinar on orthoradiology, and I'm going to talk on imaging of the pediatric hip as a whole. And as you know, it's a very expensive topic and it is impossible to cover everything from A to Z of pediatric hip imaging. So I'm going to go with the modalities, various modalities which we use in pediatric hip imaging and how we really choose which modality to choose in particular clinical scenario, and then focus more on reading a normal pelvis X-ray, which is more important in day-to-day practice, and finally wind up with the classical radiological signs and some of the common conditions, pediatric hip disorders, which we see in our day-to-day clinical practice. So the modalities which we use are ultrasound, X-rays, CT scan, and MRI, and how really one should choose the modality. So that really depends on these three factors: the age of the patient, what is the pathology behind. So we should remember that radiology comes always after a detailed history and a detailed clinical examination, by the end of which we will have what we call as a working diagnosis. So we will have a clue to the pathology already, and based on that, we should ask for the next investigation which is needed. The third factor is what is the information the surgeon is looking for in this particular investigation. So that also plays a role in which modality to choose. So let us see in detail about these three. So this is one second. There's a problem with my screen. Yeah. So just I put development of hip joint from newborn to adolescence. In the newborn, you can see that the femoral head is completely cartilaginous, and the trochanteric apophysis also is not appeared. So when you take an X-ray in this age group, you will not be able to see the femoral head at all. So if you are in a situation where you want to see whether the femoral head is contained or not, so you have to go ahead and do ultrasound, which is the investigation of choice in this age group, because the cartilage is not seen on X-rays. The ossification center for the proximal femoral epiphysis appears at about 4 months of age. So from infancy up to pre-adolescence, you can see that the epiphysis gradually increases in size. So in this age group, X-ray remains like the workhorse for pediatric hip pathologies, and you can go ahead and do MRI whenever you have the need for MRI, like when there is a suspicion of an avascular necrosis or a shape change in the femoral head. Closer to adolescence, you see that most of the ossification is complete and very little cartilage is there, and any modality is chosen by the pathology behind. You can use X-ray, CT scan, and MRI, depending on the pathology which is there. Coming on to the pathologies, I've grouped the pathologies which we see clinically into 5 basic groups. One is the abnormal morphology. The morphological abnormalities may be due to any cause. It could be DDH or femoroacetabular impingement, Perthes, Skiffy, or even post-septic sequelae. So whenever there is a morphological abnormality, when you want to study the morphology of the hip joint, X-ray remains the main investigation of joints. And depending upon what you see in the X-ray, you go for further investigations. Whereas when you see as infection, acute infections, X-ray plays a very little role. In neonates, we choose for ultrasound, and in infants, we go for MRI, where you want to see how much is the extent of the involvement, if there is any osteomyelitis or not. Trauma is the bread and butter for all of us, and we know that X-ray remains the investigation of choice for most of the traumatic conditions. And if we need to specifically see certain things, then we go for higher investigations. Whereas in cartilage disorders, when you want to image the cartilage specifically, like an idiopathic chondrolysis, or if you're planning a hip preservation sort of surgery, then you need to go for an investigation like MRI or an MR arthrogram to see the cartilage better. And finally, the other group of pathology which can involve the hip is tumors. And depending upon what kind of tumor, again, here also the investigation of choice shifts between osteoid we choose to do a CT scan. Of course, you can do an MRI also for osteoid When it comes to malignant lesions or exostosis around the hip joint, which you want to look for if there is a malignant change, MRI becomes the investigation of choice. And finally, what is the information the surgeon is looking for? Most of the times, you will have a working diagnosis, and then you will look to confirm the diagnosis in the particular image. Or sometimes what the scenario will be, you'll have no clue of the diagnosis. You are doing an advanced imaging to seek the diagnosis. And the second thing which we need is the quantification of the abnormality. So you might have diagnosed the child is having a slip capital femoral epiphysis on an X-ray, but when it comes to how severe is the slip, a two-dimensional imaging may not be sufficient, and you have to go for advanced three-dimensional imaging to exactly quantify the slip, which will help you in the decision-making process. The third information is extent of the lesion, which mainly plays a role in conditions like infection and tumors. What we have been saying previously. So we saw that there are different modalities of investigation for the imaging of hip joint, the pediatric hip joint in particular, and how chooses the right modality depends on three important factors. One is the age of the child. The second is the pathology behind, which we discussed that after a history and clinical examination will come to a working diagnosis. And the third is what specific information the surgeon is looking for in the particular investigation. So with this, I was talking about the clinical scenarios. And we started with this 16-year-old boy who had come to us with pain in the right hip for about 3 months, which was more in the night. And we saw that his X-ray was not showing much of a positive finding. And the CT scan is that where we got exactly stuck. And when you do a CT scan for these patients, when you have osteoid as a diagnosis in the back of your mind, you will be able to pick up the nidus very easily with the CT scan. Let us look at the next clinical scenario where we have five-year-old girls, two girls who presented with a similar complaints. Both of them had painless limb. And on clinical exam, the first child is having a restricted abduction with increased rotations. And the child B is having a restricted abduction with restriction of internal rotation. So we know that we have a clinical diagnosis with these findings. And the X-ray of the first child shows a dislocated hip on the right side, which is a neglected DDH. Whereas on the right side, you have a congenital coxa vara, which is classically presents with a restriction of abduction and internal rotation. So in this scenario, for us, we are taking X-rays to confirm the clinical diagnosis, which we have already made. And this mode of investigation is more than enough for us to make the clinical decision making as well. Let's move on to the third scenario where we have a 16-year-old athlete. She's an athlete is a state level player. And she has severe pain in the left hip and she's not able to play. It is limiting her activities. Clinical examination is having painful rotation. The terminal rotations are subtly painful, and this is her X-ray. So on a broad look, the X-ray looks normal, though there are certain abnormalities, which I'm going to discuss about in the later part of my talk. So in this particular patient, just by X-ray findings, we will not be able to localize the cause for her pain. So in this particular patient, there is a role for MR arthrogram, which shows a labral tear along with the extensive effusion in the joint. With this, we will briefly move on to various modalities. First is the ultrasound. As you know, ultrasound has three important indications as far as the pediatric hip imaging is concerned. One is DDH as a screening tool. It is used in many countries. The second is synovitis, and third is septic arthritis. So DDH for neonates, we discussed that the femoral head is completely cartilaginous and you need to do an ultrasound to see whether the head is located or not. This is the standard position which we do the ultrasound, which what we call as the lateral position, and the plane is called the coronal plane ultrasound. And that's the kind of image which you get for ultrasound of the hip. So in our practice, we don't have the facility of universal screening of all the newborn babies. So what we follow is called the at-risk screening. So whenever we feel that the child is having a high risk or the newborn is having a high risk for hip dysplasia, we go ahead and do the ultrasound. So interpreting the ultrasound is important. As a clinician, we need to know that. So this is the ultrasound probe, which is in the lateral position. And what you see here is the bony acetabulum, and this is the cartilaginous acetabulum, and this is the labrum. So we need to know the orientation of the ultrasound. That is more important. But we as orthopedic surgeons are always used to see the hip X-ray like this. So as far as the ultrasound is concerned, you got to rotate the image, and exactly the same information is seen in the ultrasound image as well. So you have the femoral head there. The left is the bony ileum, and that's the acetabular cartilage, and that's the labrum. Then you have the gluteus minimus muscle and the gluteus medius muscle. So essentially, this represents the bony acetabular roof, and this part represents the cartilaginous roof. So your alpha angle is drawn by the straight line drop down and the line drawn over the bony ileum. That forms the alpha angle in the graph classification. I'm not going into details of the graph classification, and you have various types in it. But only disadvantage of this particular classification for hip dysplasia based on ultrasound is that this is highly user dependent. So it completely depends upon your sonologist or the radiologist who's doing the ultrasound of the hip joint. So type 2D is considered as decentering, and type 2D, 3 and 4 needs intervention. So one of the easiest way to find out whether the hip is dysplastic or not in ultrasound in a clinical practice is to see the image, and you drop a line from the lateral aspect of the acetabulum, that's the bony ileum, down. And if you can see the femoral head, which is end-located, it is important that your section, the ultrasound image, should show all this. There should be a bony ileum visible, there should be the femoral head, and the cartilaginous acetabulum also visible. So in this particular section, if you drop a line, and if you see that there's a femoral head, more than 50% of the head is medial to that line, then you're sure that this hip is very well contained and your acetabulum is not dysplastic. So this is a very simple way of assessing whether the acetabulum is dysplastic or not in the ultrasound image. And the next indication for ultrasound is to find out if there is an effusion in the hip joint. So it can detect an effusion. You can see this is the femoral head margin, which is seen white, and this is the effusion. But unfortunately, you will not be able to differentiate between pus and the synovial fluid. You can do ultrasound guided aspiration. Next, let's move on to the X-rays, which is one of the most common investigation which we do in our day-to-day practice. And practically any pathology which is affecting the hip, X-ray can be used. I'm not going to go to the details of the various conditions which I'll subsequently discuss. The next modality of investigation is the CT scan, which has very limited role as far as the pediatric hip is concerned. So one should be aware of the fact that the CT scan is having a huge amount of radiation, and in pediatric patients, we don't want to have unnecessary CT scans taken. So there are very specific indications for CT scan. One of the conditions is osteoid osteoma, which we saw previously in a patient. And in slip capital femoral epiphysis, when you want to quantify the amount of slip, or when you want to see the status of the physis, you can take a CT scan. And in cases of sequelae of the Perthes disease or septic arthritis of the hip, where you are planning complex reconstructive surgeries like head reduction, osteotomies, or head reshaping procedures, there is a role for a 3D CT scan. And nowadays, people are doing 3D printing to pre-plan their surgery as well. So these are the limited indications. So just a case example to show a patient with bilateral slip capital femoral epiphysis. You can see that there are slip on both the sides, but with this information, it is difficult to decide what you want to do for this particular patient, because the status of the physis is not known clearly by this X-rays. It is in these patients where CT scan may be indicated. So when you take a CT scan, you'll be able to see that on the right side, the physis is still open, whereas on the left side, the deformity is much more severe. You can see that the neck is bent, and this is called the banana neck deformity, and the physis is almost partly fused. So this helps in making decision for this particular patient. Next is the MRI. MRI again has very specific roles in imaging of the pediatric hip. One is infection. You can see the amount of abscess collection, the extent of the involvement of the osteomyelitis in the proximal femur. And the second thing is where the status of the head of the femur. So we know that septic arthritis causes destruction of the femoral head, And in young children, you'll not be able to make out because a part of it is cartilaginous. So in these situations where you want to know whether the head is there or not, MRI is a good investigation to go ahead and do. And the second common indication is when you are looking for chondrolabral pathologies, particularly in femoroacetabular impingement, where you want to see if there is a labral tear or not, or idiopathic chondrolysis, where in early stages you can pick up the disease and you can start the treatment. And advanced MRI imaging like perfusion MRI and dejameric MRI are indicated when you have in certain clinical scenarios, which are advanced imaging and mostly used for research purpose and not into clinical practice as yet. So let's look at this again, a clinical scenario of a 12-year-old boy who had a trivial fall 2 months back, and he had a native treatment. And 2 months later, he developed severe pain and he was unable to walk. So this was the X-ray which was looking normal at the time of the fall. Fortunately, they have taken an X-ray at the time of fall and then went for native treatment. And this is the X-ray when he comes to us with severe pain and fever. We know that there is a gross destruction of the entire femur and there is a slip in the proximal femur. So though the X-ray gives a lot of information here, we need more information in this particular patient before go ahead and doing any sort of treatment. So if you take the MRI in this particular patient, you can see that there is a lot of abscess in the lateral and the posterior aspect of the distal femur, as well as the proximal femur. There is a slip and the capital femoral epiphysis was completely avascular, which has a very huge bearing on the treatment of this particular patient. A word about the perfusion MRI, which is widely being used at a research level in Perthes disease. It is a gadolinium enhanced MRI with subtraction technique, and they have a specialized software to measure the amount of perfusion percentage. These are the example images, and based on the color codings, they decide how much of perfusion is happening in the femoral head. So this investigation is being used in early stages of Perthes disease to quantify the amount of femoral head involvement, and they are trying to say whether they can come out with a value, particular value of perfusion, at which stage, which can decide the prophylactic containment surgical procedure will be of use to the patient. So this is a case again of a post-septic sequelae. You can see that the right hip is the ossific nucleus is looking small, the femoral head is small, and there is severe coxa vara. Though the X-ray gives a lot of information, we really do not know whether the head is completely present or it is absent, which is important for us to decide the treatment. So when you do an MRI, you'll be able to see that the child has got a huge head. So this information is of very high importance for deciding the treatment, where you can plan to reconstruct the hip joint in this scenario by doing a valgus osteotomy. And this is the arthrogram image of the child, which shows that there is a good femoral head. Let's now move on to imaging of various hip pathologies, that is like pathology specific imaging. First is DDH. We did see about DDH in ultrasound, but again in our country we see a lot of patients in walking age, very few patients in the neonatal stage who are being diagnosed with DDH. So these are the common lines which we need to draw in a child who is presenting with suspected developmental dysplasia of the hip. So a line connecting both the triradiate cartilage is called the Hilgenreiners line. A line drawn on the outer side of the acetabular cartilage margin, the outer part of the sourcil, is called as the Perkins line. So the Hilgenreiners line and Perkins line divides the hip joint into 4 different quadrants. And the metaphysis is usually on the inner and medial quadrant. If it is inner and medial quadrant, we know that the hip is in place. So you can see that in this particular patient, it is on the outer side. Then we have to draw the Shenton's line, which is the inferior border of the superior pubic rami, which is continuous with the inferior border of the neck of the femur. So you can see that the Shenton's arc or the Shenton's line is broken on both the hips, which indicates that there is dislocation of the hip. The other important parameter which we need to measure in pediatric hip with dysplasia or DDH is, this is a follow-up patient of a developmental dysplasia of hip who underwent closed reduction. He had DDH on both the sides. We did closed reduction, and this is a follow-up X-ray, and we have to measure the acetabular index. Acetabular index is measured by drawing the Hilgenreiners line, and another line is drawn from the triradiate cartilage to the outer part of the acetabulum. So you can see that there is increased acetabular index on the left side. The normal angle is 30 degrees. Anything more than 30 degrees is considered to be abnormal, and it warrants a acetabular procedure in form of a acetabuloplasty. So a word about Toni's classification. Toni's classification is used to grade the amount of dysplasia in the hip in young children. So Toni's divides the acetabulum into 4 quadrants by a horizontal line and the vertical line drawn at the outer part. And this is called the Toni's point, which is the center of the ossific nucleus of the femoral head. So this is called as grade 1, which is the normal hip. And if it migrates to the outer quadrant, it is grade 2. If it migrates to the superior border of the acetabulum, it classified it as grade 3. And if it migrates further up, it is called grade 4 Toni's. So it is basically to grade the severity of the dysplasia of the hip joint. So this was a problem. There was a problem to use Toni's classification when the ossific nucleus was not present. So IHDA, the International Hip Dysplasia Institute, came out with this own classification. So in this, the Hilgenreines line and Perkins line are drawn, and a 45 degrees angle line is dropped. This is called the H line, and they marked a point which is the center of the metaphysis of the neck, so which is called the H point. So based on the position of the H point in relation to these quadrants, again they graded the dysplasia. This is grade 1, which is normal hip, and when the H point is slightly lateral to the Perkins line but medial to the H line, it is called grade 2. When it migrates there, it is called grade 3, and if it is way up high, it is grade 4, which is a completely dislocated hip. So it is important to know these two classifications, X-ray based classification in DDH. The other thing is the Reimers migration percentage. We all know that in children with cerebral palsy, we do hip surveillance and we periodically keep seeing how the hip is migrating out. So Reimers index is measured by the ratio of the physis. This is the Perkins line. You have to draw a Perkins line and then measure the width of the physis and how much of the physis is outside the Perkins line. So this ratio gives the Reimers migration percentage or the Reimers index. And if this percentage is more than 40%, it is an indication for a surgical intervention in a patient with cerebral palsy. Next is synovitis. Synovitis is one of the most common clinical scenarios which we get in clinical practice, day-to-day practice. Transient synovitis of the hip is one of the common conditions. So you should look for soft tissue shadows. You can see that on the right side, there are more enhanced soft tissue shadows and increased medial joint space compared to the left side. So this is one of the classical signs, which is called the Waldenstrom's sign, which is seen in, which just means that there is effusion in the hip joint. It could be due to any cause. So this could be an early stage of Perthes disease, as it turned out to be in this particular patient. When we followed up, the child developed avascular necrosis of the proximal femur, again, which is again one of the signs is Waldenstrom's sign. The second sign in Perthes, early Perthes is crescent sign. In the frog-leg lateral view, you see a subchondral fracture line. So this is called the crescent sign, which is particular to Perthes disease. So as students, it is important to know this classification, which is called modified Waldenstrom's staging for Perthes disease, which describes the natural history of Perthes disease. So it divides into 4 stages. Stage of avascular necrosis is 1, fragmentation is 2, reconstitution is 3, and remodeling is 4. Each stage is subsequently divided into 2A and B based on the radiographic finding. So in 1A, the height of the capital femoral epiphysis is maintained, whereas in 1B, there is subtle flattening of the femoral epiphysis. So 2 is fragmentation. In 2A, you have only 1 or 2 fissures, which means that there will be either 2 or 3 fragments. In 2B, you have more fragments. In 3A, the reconstitution starts on the lateral 1/3. The lateral aspect alone is reconstitution is happening. In 3B, it comes to the medial side, and stage 4 is the heel stage. So this is the natural history classification or the staging, which is useful in clinical decision making, and it can be asked for exams also. So this is both for clinical decision making as well as in your exams. When it comes to healed Perthes disease, this is also again one of the common scenarios which we get, a child presenting with a painless limp. So these are all the possibilities which you can see. One is coxa magna, which just means that the head is enlarged. The coxa breva means that there is shortening of the neck. And coxa plana just means that flattening of the head. And coxa irregularis is the head is irregular. So it is important to know all these terminologies. And when you're reading the hip X-ray, it is better to use these terminologies. And sagging rope sign again is one of the signs which you see in healed Perthes disease. I'm going to show examples for each of this. So in the left extreme, you can see that the head is irregular. This is called coxa irregularis. This is just a coxa magna. So you see the mushroom-shaped head in this patient. So the right side is the shortening of the neck. It is called coxa breva or coxa brevis. And you can see the sagging rope sign, which just means that it is a shadow of the overhanging head. So this, when you have a huge head, the border of the head is seen here, which is called as the sagging rope sign. Slip capital femoral epiphysis, again, it's one of the common conditions which is very commonly missed in the early stages. So this is an X-ray of a child with an early slip. So on a brief view, the X-ray will look like it is normal. So one can easily miss the slip. So these are all the common signs which is seen in early slip. So all the signs are there in this particular patient. So the first sign which you should look is there is widening of the physis. Compared to the right side, you can see that there is widening of the physis. Definitely this is abnormal. So Klein's line is nothing but a straight line drawn along the superior border of the neck. This line is called Klein's line, and it is normally it will cut at least 25% of the capital femoral epiphysis. On the left side, you can see that it is much lesser. So this sign is called the Trethovan's sign. So the line is called Klein's line and the sign is called Trethovan's sign. Capinus sign is nothing but in a normal hip, if you see the metaphysis of the neck, it overlaps over the posterior wall of the acetabulum, and you see this triangular shadow, which is called the Capinus triangle. When there is a slip, that is obliterated. So the loss of Capinus triangle is also called as Capinus sign or the Shams sign. Both are same. The next sign is Steele's metaphysal Blanche sign. So when there is a slip, the capital femoral epiphysis slips posteriorly, and you can see the shadow of the head overlapping the neck in a crescent form. So this crescent shaped overlap of the head is called the Steele's sign or the Steele's metaphysal Blanche sign. So these are the early signs one needs to keep in mind to diagnose an early slip. So next, coming on to the FAI and dysplasia spectrum. FAI is femoroacetabular impingement, and dysplasia is considered as either ends of a same spectrum of disorders. So it is important to get a true AP pelvis. I'm going to tell in detail about how to get a true AP pelvis and what are all the various views which we get and what are all the important things which you should look when you look at the normal pelvis X-ray. So this is a very good article for you to read, a systematic approach to the plain radiographic evaluation of young adult hip, which was published in JBJS in 2008. So those of who are interested in learning the radiology of hip joint, please go through this article in detail. So a true AP pelvis is occurred with the feet in 15 degrees of internal rotation, and the beam should be centered over the symphysis pubis, and the exposure should be adequate to show both the acetabular walls well. So this is how you take the normal AP X-ray. So it's about 120 centimeters. The cassette is placed 15 degrees of internal rotation, and the beam is centered over the symphysis pubis. So this is how a normal AP, a good normal true AP view will look like this. So you have to see first the rotation, if there is any rotation of the pelvis. You can see that the spine is centered to the pubic symphysis, which means that the pelvis is not rotated. And the other thing to look at is the obturator foramina, which should be symmetrical on both the sides. The second thing is the distance from the tip of the coccyx to the symphysis pubis, which is normally around 2 to 4 centimeters. So if it is increased or decreased, then it indicates that there is an inlet or outlet view. So it is important to see all these things when you read a pelvis X-ray. Other views, the cross-table lateral view is taken, is a standard lateral view which we take. And this is the X-ray which you get when you take a cross-table lateral view with 45 degrees of angulation of the cassette. The problem with this particular view is there can be overlap of the soft tissue shadows and you get very little information, and this is not routinely indicated for FAI. Then the next view is 45 degrees Dunn's view, which is taken with the affected hip in 45 degrees of flexion with 20 degrees of abduction and neutral rotation. So this is one of the most important views which we need to take when you're doing assessment of the young adult hip for femoroacetabular impingement. So this is the 45 degrees Dunn view, where you will be able to see the femoral head neck junction very well. The next view is the frog-leg lateral view, which is the normal frog-leg lateral view. Again, it gives a very good profile, lateral profile of the proximal femur. And this is a false profile view when you want to see the anterior coverage of the femoral head. So the pelvis is outward rotated 65 degrees, and then this film is shot from here. You get this is a view which you get when you do this false profile view, which is also called as the Liquisnes view. And you can see the anterior coverage of the femoral head. So these are all the various views which is indicated when you are imaging a young or a skeletally mature hip for workup of hip preservation procedures. So now coming back to the true AP view, what are all the things which you need to look when you see a true AP view? First is the orientation and tilt. As we discussed earlier, we have to see whether the spine is centered to the pubic symphysis, whether the operator foramina are good. I will show examples of inlet and outlet in my subsequent slides. The next thing which you look at is the joint space. So you have to see whether the joint space is looking symmetrical on both the sides, or if there is any increase or decrease in joint space. The third thing is acetabulum. By acetabulum, we mean that we have to see how much is the coverage of the hip joint. Next is the femoral head and neck along with the proximal femur. And no reading of the hip X-ray is complete without looking at the commenting on the sacroiliac joints and the sacrum and the soft tissue shadows. So you should have a systematic way of reading the X-ray. Whenever a pelvis X-ray is put up, you should go in a systematic way, and you see all these things, you will not be missing anything. Coming to the acetabulum, these are all the things which you should see in acetabulum. The sourcil, you have to see the size of the sourcil, shape of the sourcil, the inclination, the anterior wall, and the posterior wall. So I'm going to show in this X-ray of this particular patient. So this is called the iliopectineal line, which is the representation of the anterior column, and this is the ilioischial line or the colus line, which is the representation of the posterior column. This is actually the sourcil or the eyebrows, which is the weight-bearing dome of the acetabulum. And I'm tracing the anterior wall. In this particular patient, you can see that this is the anterior wall and that is the posterior wall. I have labeled the anterior wall in yellow and the posterior wall in blue. So you should be able to trace both these walls. So it is important to see all this in any pelvis X-ray, and that is the teardrop. So you can see that this is the medial wall of the acetabulum and this is the colus line. So when the medial wall of the acetabulum goes medial to the ilioischial line, that is called as coxa profunda, and if the femoral head goes medial to the ilioischial line, it is called as protrusio acetabuli. So it is important to differentiate between coxa profunda and protrusio acetabuli. The other measurements which we do in a pelvis X-ray is the lateral central edge angle, which is nothing but the line from the center of the femoral head, which is a vertical line, and a line connecting the outer border of the sourcil. So this is called the lateral central edge angle, which is normally around 25 to 35 degrees. An increase in the lateral central edge angle indicates that there is dysplasia, and the decrease indicates that there is a overcoverage. The other angle is the medial central edge angle, which is the line from the center of the femoral head to the medial border of the sourcil. So this is called the medial central edge angle, and it is normally is 35 to 45 degrees. So you can see that this is the normal sourcil, which covers the sourcil arc is about 60 to 65 degrees. So we call it that as acetabular arc. The next angle is the Sharp's angle, a line connecting both the teardrops and the another line which is connecting from the teardrop to the outer border of the acetabulum, that is called Sharp's angle, which is normally is 35 to 45 degrees. So all these angles are important to quantify the amount of dysplasia versus overcoverage. An ideal acetabulum should have at least 80% of the head to be covered superiorly. The posterior wall should be covering 50% of the head, and the anterior wall should be covering at least 20% of the head. It should be anteverted 15 to 20 degrees. And the sourcil size should be at least having an acetabular arc of 60 to 65 degrees, as we saw on the previous X-ray. And the sourcil angle, which is also called as the Tony's angle, it should be up about 0 to 10 degrees. So any angle more than 10 degrees indicates it's an upsloping sourcil, which is dysplasia. And the negative sourcil angle, which is indicative of over coverage. So let us look at some of the other X-rays. So you can see that this is also looking like an AP X-ray of the pelvis. But if you look carefully, the operator foramen is not symmetrical. Definitely there is a rotational problem. It looks like it is right rotated. This is the center of the pelvis. It is not centered towards this. And whenever there is an inlet view, you have to understand that you will have a anterior wall will be over coverage will be seen. So there is a rotation of the pelvis which makes us assume that there is an anterior over coverage. So you should do the calculation in your brain that this is an inlet view, that the patient is not having a true anterior over coverage, but it appears that there is a anterior over coverage, which we call as an apparent anterior over coverage. You can see that the ischial spine signs, which is an indication of a acetabular retroversion is seen. So if you think that this patient is having acetabular retroversion, it is purely because of the position of the pelvis and not the acetabulum is as such retroverted. This is an example of an outlet view where you can see that again, there is increased posterior coverage and decreased anterior coverage purely because of the placement of your X-ray beam. So there is decreased anterior wall and increased posterior wall in an outlet view. So you should, whenever you are reading an X-ray, it is important to see whether your rotation of the pelvis is good, your tilt of the pelvis is good, because all this has got bearing on whether this particular patient is having either dysplasia or over coverage. It is just not by seeing the X-ray. And this is a good X-ray to show that the medial wall of the acetabulum is medial to the ilioischial line, which is called the coxa profunda. So this is an X-ray of a patient. I'm just going to draw the lines for you. So that is the anterior wall. There is a posterior wall. And you can see that it is covering about 20 to 25% of the anterior wall is covering 20% of the femoral head, and about close to 50% of the posterior wall is covering 50% of the femoral head. And this is considered to be a normal hip. You have a good acetabular sourcil, which is angle about 60 degrees or more. On the contrary, if you look at this X-ray, again, if the hip looks well contained, there is no subluxation. Your source, if you draw the Shenton's line, it will be intact. But when you specifically look for anterior wall and the posterior wall, you can see that though the anterior wall has got good coverage up to 20%, the posterior wall is covering only less than 50% of the femoral head, and your lateral coverage also is less, which is measured by your lateral central edge angle. So that's the center of the femoral head, and your lateral central edge angle is definitely decreased. So this is definitely a case of dysplasia. So mind you that these are all only morphological abnormalities. So when it comes to clinical decision making, we don't just see the X-rays and decide that this patient is having acetabular dysplasia and needs surgery. So the morphology does not mean anything. So the patient should have corroboratory clinical findings for us to do any kind of intervention. This is X-ray again, looks pretty normal on just a look of it. But when you draw the lines, you will see that that's the anterior wall and that's the posterior wall. That's the center of the femoral head. You can see that whenever the posterior wall is lateral to the center of the femoral head, this is called the posterior wall sign, which indicates that there is posterior over coverage. And you can see that the lateral central edge angle is more. So this is again a case of another indication that this is a over coverage, and you can see that the sourcil is also down sloping. Moving on to femoroacetabular impingement, which is defined as a dynamic conflict between the acetabulum and the femoral head. We saw how to image the acetabulum, and we are going to see how to see the femoral head. What are all the parameters which we should see? So there are three types of femoroacetabular impingements which is described. One is the cam, second is a pincer, and the third is mixed impingement. I'm not going to go to the details of what is cam and pincer. So, but the assessment of the femoral head and neck is usually done with the Dunn view or the frog leg lateral view. And these are the two things which we measure. One is the alpha angle and the second is the head neck offset. So alpha angle is usually measured in the frog leg lateral view or the Dunn's lateral view. You draw a line along the center of the femoral head through the femoral neck, and you have to draw a circle which is circle the femoral head. And the second line is usually drawn at the point where the head is going off from the circle. So this angle is called the alpha angle of Notzili. This was described by Notzili. And anything more than 55 is considered as abnormal. So you can see that in this patient, it is more than 55. You can see this bump here, which is the CAM bump. And this patient is femoroacetabular CAM type of femoroacetabular impingement. So increase in alpha angle indicates that there is a CAM type of femoroacetabular impingement. The second thing is to look for the femoral head neck offset. So again, line through the center of the femoral into the neck. The second line is through the anterior border of the femoral neck, and the third line C is through the anterior border of the femoral head. So these are the three lines you draw, and you have the distance between B and C actually measures the size of the CAM impingement. So normally in asymptomatic hips, it is about 11.6 millimeters, and when you have an impingement or a CAM bump, this distance is decreased. And the offset ratio is measured by the ratio of the offset divided by the diameter of the femoral head. So when the ratio is less than 0.17, again, this indicates that there is significant decrease in the femoral head neck offset, and it indicates that there is a CAM impingement. So to summarize, as we saw, the age of the child, the pathology which you come into as a working diagnosis based on the detailed history and clinical examination, and what information you need on further imaging basically decides what modality of investigation is needed. And I would say that plain X-ray remains the workhorse as far as the pediatric hip imaging is concerned. Most of the information in, I would say like 80 to 85% of the patients you'll be able to get with just a plain X-ray. CT scan has a very limited role in specific cases, whereas MRI definitely has a important role in pediatric hip imaging as far as your infections and tumors and hip preservation work is concerned. Thank you.